derivative of Lord of the Rings and such, but it gradually became its own setting with its own lore, its own histories, and along the way we got a little bit of speed bumps, such as Constant Drachenfels, the subject of today's video. And I'm sorry, I'm not really used to speaking on videos yet, and for a long time like this, but hopefully I can get my point across, and I hope I'm not too distracted for this. So, Drachenfels comes from the Warhammer roleplay books, which is, older stuff. It's not really canon. Well, at least the older stuff is. I'm not sure about the new 5th edition, I think it is, stuff, but it's not really considered canon. A lot of the older stuff there. It's kind of canon in the same way you might, like a spin-off of something is, where, they'll reference it every now and then, but it's not really important in the grand scheme of things. Another thing important to note here is that this is all old lore, so that's going to be the crux of my argument for why he shouldn't be included in Total War Warhammer as the Nameless or anything. So I just want to give a brief overview of the character, my thoughts on the book, of which he is the main antagonist, his future appearances, and what his best role should be in any Warhammer title. So, the character. So, I'm going to have to stop saying that. Constant Drachenfels is actually one of the oldest human beings, or as much as he can be considered human, in the Warhammer setting. He was there when the old ones came to the planet. He's technically a proto-human. So, he has been a sort of weird thing, because of that. So eventually he was going to die. And you know how it is. You don't want to die, do you? So what he did was start swapping bodies around. So he was abandoned by his tribe. He survived by taking the bodies of others and, assimilating them into himself. That sort of awful thing. And he was just pure evil. And he doesn't actually know where that power comes from. He's like, I guess I can do this now. Whoopsie-doo. And because he's there before the old ones came and, created chaos, he apparently looks down on them, which is kind of funny considering the setting and what that actually means. So, this video is intended for people who are at least familiar with the background. If you're curious about what the Chaos Gods are, what that means to look down upon them, there's plenty of lore videos on YouTube if you're that curious. But let me put it like this way. This is like a guy... Oh boy. He's like a guy so convinced that he's evil that he's better than Satan himself. The guy who invented the concept. So, eventually he builds a nice big Castle Drachenfels, and he, in his history, just kind of acts like a massive arsehole. And that's honestly the best way I could describe it. He's not exactly a very compelling villain, if you ask me. He's just evil. He looks down on the Chaos Gods. He's more than happy to use them. And to be fair, there are characters in both settings that are more, we're going to use the Chaos Gods and their demons to accomplish our goals, but that often, it's usually just, if you look into it, it's just more an excuse, like, the Chaos Gods kind of just have an influence, and like, that's how it starts, we'll help you, we're going to expect some payments back, and I suppose that's what they're doing here, but, I don't know, like, the way the books describe him, he's like, they buy too much into his hype, is what I'm trying to say here. So, basically he enslaves demons, goblins, and orcs. So, this is another problem that's going to be funny. So if they do put him into Total War Warhammer, if you want him to have a lore-accurate army, Nameless is going to rely a lot on orcs, chaos demons, and people stupid enough to follow him. He's had be something of an army considering what's going on with the meta there, or at least my playthroughs. I'm gonna admit I'm not exactly an expert on Total War, but I do enjoy playing a campaign every now and then. And you'll notice I'm going over a lot of this. A lot of this backstory is in the books. The book Drachenfels, which is an interesting read. I don't like it very much. It's like a look back into what Warhammer used to be, and it's not exactly been very inspiring. So, if I had to sum up the character, there was this one time. There's a small anecdote that I personally think is really funny. Like, he's groveling, saying, "Oh, I've decided to change my ways," and this is late when there's an empire. There's humans around who can have printing presses and know who he is. He's like, "Oh, I apologize. I've done wrong. Let me make up for it," and people believe him. So what he does, he gets them all together in Castle Drachenfels with a big apology feast. But a plot twist, it's all poisoned, and then he gets to enjoy it while they're paralyzed, unable to eat a single bite, and it's awful. It's like a sign of, he's so evil, guys. He's so evil. And that's kind of why I don't like him as a character. He's just a bad person. Not even like in a compelling way like Nagash or any of the other Warhammer antagonists usually are. They're just, like, he's so comically over the top that, honestly, I think if you're going to have to use him, you're going to have to treat him like with a bit of as a joke. I think it's telling that in the Vermintide games, he's mostly just a voice that's annoying in the characters' heads, trying to make them feel evil. So, now for the book. So, Drachenfels is written by Kim Newman, who is a pen name for an author whose name I don't remember, and it involves two characters that he's used a lot, and it's set in the Warhammer world, so it's more like their Warhammer counterparts of Genevieve and Drachenfels himself. So, Genevieve's a whole other can of worms, and I don't like thinking about her too much. She is a Mary Sue, not on the level of, say, Rey or anything like that, but she's like really weird. She's in a really weird position if you actually think about it, both in her story, like assuming it's not connected to Warhammer Fantasy at all. Like, her story is just kind of bizarre. So, she's a vampire, but she doesn't have any of the weaknesses from her vampire bloodline, because she's trained. She can go out into the sun without it feeling too weird on her. Warhammer vampires don't have a weakness to the sun. It's more like an irritant if they're at her kind of blood potency, to borrow a term from Vampire the Masquerade. So, basically, Drachenfels ruined her life, killed her parents, if I recall, when in Britonia, which is not the medieval joke that it is in canon, or would become in canon. It's more like right before the French Revolution. So she escapes, becomes a vampire, a Lamian vampire from a male Lamian vampire, which would become a very rare thing, like next to impossible. I think the only one actually is in the Total War games now. But it's rare, but it does happen. Because they're usually composed of women that Neferetta likes. But let's move on. And then she goes to Cathay, and honestly, she's probably the source of the only Warhammer Cathay stuff for a long time, which she trains in Kung Fu under Master Po, who helps her out. And I'm really wondering if they're going to bring that back, because I'm enjoying Cathay and Immortal Empires, and Warhammer, Total War Warhammer, and it's really fun. But, and basically she's accepted by the Empire, which, is still weird, even back during the time, because they have witch hunters, and she's not well liked, but she's allowed to be a barmaid and well known. Like, oh, she's the vampire who served me drinks the other night. And Warhammer isn't exactly the type of fantasy that's normal. So she's eventually hired to go on an expedition by Oswald. And it plays out in the first few chapters as sort of like a D&D game. And I compare this to a D&D game because it honestly feels like Kim Newman was a DM, and then whoever was playing Oswald played exceptionally well, and he's like, for a killer DM who's trying to do like a horror campaign focused around his DM PC, Genevieve, and his big bad evil guy, Drachenfels, who just won. Like, destroyed him. So, and as far as the book goes, like in the early chapters, that's what we assumed happened. Oswald killed the great enchanter. And now, he's living off the success he knows the Emperor, Karl Franz. And, they want to make a play out of him because this is the closest thing you can get to a movie at the time period. Kim Newman didn't go too crazy. But they're filming it they're playing it on set at Castle Drachenfels because that's still standing. So, what they do is that they gather all the old party members who are, the warriors, old and fat, a couple of the older party members. The actress who's playing Genevieve doesn't like her, and Genevieve doesn't like her doesn't like her either. And they have a famous playwright fresh out of prison, Detlik Sieff, who is referenced in Gortrick and Felix, I should point out. He's a very famous one. A lot of people reference back to this book because apparently it was popular back in the day. I don't see why, but okay. But then one of the actors is a serial killer or an occultist to Drachenfels who's killing people in order to bring him back. Like, who've seen Drachenfels. And this would actually be a very interesting plot point if they didn't reveal it, like, almost immediately. Like, it's a standard murder mystery stuff, right? You don't reveal the murderer right away. But they do it very quickly. Then again, the book is pretty fast to read, if you ask me. I watched it on audiobook. I listened to it as an audiobook, and most of the chapters are like a minute or so. So, yeah, the plot is that the actor's trying to bring Drachenfels back. He pins the blame on a mutant, which is probably like the most interesting point of the book, is that one of Detle's helpers is a dwarf, not a fantasy dwarf. He's a human with dwarfism. And, he's looked down upon, he's a mutant, and he thinks that he's going crazy to becoming a chaos spawn, and so it drives him crazy. And, he commits suicide, and it's a very big, important moment. But eventually Oswald takes Karl Franz to the castle, and they start the play. Genevieve's actress is the only intelligent character in the book, and I wonder why Genevieve doesn't like her. Because she left after the murder started happening. Which is the smartest move I've ever seen in a story like this, of a character just, fuck it, I'm out. So, and then the climax of the novel is that Genevieve and Detlef, who's become romantically involved with her, are empowered by Sigmar. Now, Warhammer follows this kind of holy burns evil. Holy magic is still magic. It follows all the same rules, even if it's coming from a god. In fact, if you look into some of the codexes, it's not so much that it's coming from a god, so much as the preacher, whoever's channeling it, belief that their magic is coming from their god. So that's why, on the tabletop, when you have priests, they can cast spells, but they don't exactly function like you think spells would. I think in the Warhammer Fantasy ones they do, but in the Age of Sigmar, they act a little differently because like their gods are real and everything's magic, so they might as well go full in on it. But usually this would kill Genevieve, but I guess she's the good one. And then it turns out that Oswald, because I really don't like what they did with Oswald because Oswald was at least feigning confidence for a whole while, but then when the Drachenfels comes back and he's getting pounded on by Genevieve, he goes Joker-ish, trying to kill Karl Franz. And curiously, at the time, Karl Franz, from what I understand, was depicted as a bit of a corrupt bureaucrat. And this is when his characterization started becoming the one that we all know and love today, the man who gets things done on his giant griffin. But, well, they kill Drachenfels, and one thing that I really like is that, when he's dying, he realizes that despite his long life, he's barely, lived a blink in the eye in the universe. Apparently, he doesn't have a good grasp of time either, considering what's going to happen in a few years. But, yeah, it's a fitting end, I think, to him. And that's where the book ends, with Genevieve and Detlef living together. I haven't read any of the sequels, like The Beast in Velvet, or however you pronounce it. But, yeah, it ends on a note with them deciding to blow up the castle, which I think they should have done a lot earlier. The Empire doesn't have a shortage of gunpowder. So, and that's kind of where Drachenfels dies. They have the RPG books where you can go visit his castle. Vermintide visits the castle where he doesn't make an appearance, but his spirit's in the background. But then the end times happened. So, those of you not in the know, the end times is basically the grand finale of Warhammer Fantasy. And Nagash, one of my favorite villainous characters, who has some of the flaws of Drachenfels, I'm willing to admit. He is evil for evil's sake, but at least he has this ego about him that's important, he's so self-important that he wants to control life and death in this endless stasis. I find him to be really interesting, especially in Age of Sigmar, when he actually gets what he wants and still wants more. So Drachenfels is resurrected, but due to copyright, I think he's just called the Nameless. Same thing with Genevieve. She has a cameo here and there, but the Nameless becomes one of Nagash's Mortarks, which are basically his generals. Nagash is as much a Saturday cartoon villain, like I said, as Drachenfels, but at least, Nagash is following through with all the tropes with having, a set of minions that obey his every whim. So Nameless doesn't remember much. He knows enough about his necromancy and his abilities to be useful to Nagash, but, well, I'm just going to say it, Luthor Harkon is a more interesting Mortark. And if I had to bring back anyone for Age of Sigmar, it would be Luthor Harkon first, because we really do need some pirates. So, he's eventually killed off. Let me double check here on the wiki. He's, he tries to get back. He's forgotten by Nagash. Thank you, Nagash. I like you more and more, and I'm really hoping he ends up as a legendary lord in Total War Warhammer. Finally bringing him back would be nice. Oh, good. He is eventually killed by Luthor Huss. Honestly, that's a good ending for the guy. Luthor Huss killing him off. A good and worthy final send-off to a good Warhammer character. But, alright. I know this has been rambling and everything, but to sum up, Drachenfels as a character, let's start. Drachenfels as a character, narrative-wise and everything, I just don't find him very compelling. It's kind of like, when I think generic evil, and when I think of generic evil in Warhammer, I think of people like Abaddon the Despoiler or, Drachenfels. They have reasons. Well, Abaddon does. I'll give him that. But Drachenfels doesn't. He's, his whole life, his whole like narrative in the story is just being evil because he's bored and wants to harm people. Like Abaddon has ambitions. He wants to take over the Warhammer Galaxy to make it his own, and rule it as he thinks that he's owed. Nagash wants to create a world of undeath where everything obeys him because he thinks that's genuinely better than serving chaos. When you think evil in Warhammer has ambitions, orcs, goblins even have ambitions. They're all stupid. They're all, blood hungry, but they have ambitions. Chaos lords have ambitions, even if they're like turned into slaves of their gods. Drachenfels, he's like practically already won. Like, what do you do with that? Like, if you have him on a campaign, what's the end game for him? To spread misery and grief? Like, he's not a conqueror. He can be. He's just a big bad evil guy that you get your party together to stop. He might be a horrible person. He might be able to do horrible things, but he's not that special in the grand scheme of things. As another thing that goes against him is that he's really old school lore, where goblins obey him out of fear and treachery, when those things will backstab you with the second they get. The Skaven of all races, the little rat men who are backstabbers to a rat, I guess. They one of the moments that like shows you how horrifying Nagash is that the Skaven unanimously agree we need to kill him, and then they help humanity kill him, and they hate each other and humanity so much, but they're willing to put that aside just to try and kill Nagash. It didn't work, but you have to admire them for trying. And like old Warhammer lore, it's nice at times. I will say that Bretonia could probably use the update. So far, I'm liking like what Old World is doing with the art, at least, where it doesn't look like all the presents are actually inbred, and kind of highlights the more unfair aspects of Bretonian society. But like Genevieve, I don't hope she shows up apparently in like a Warhammer Age of Sigmar novel, and I'm not going to read that because they both suffer from the problem of being relics from an age that, where Warhammer was very different. Where Warhammer was, a bit more loose and generic. And as the Warhammer settings kind of solidify, things have to change. And things have to be, declared non-canon or, written in universe as a story. So, I guess if we have to put Drachenfels in any Warhammer property, I think he works better as some sort of story or like example of wickedness. Maybe like imply that the history of what the character goes through is more like legends, and like leave it a mystery, like what the heck he actually is. Is he a chaos worshipper? Is he some sort of rogue old one experiment? Is he, I don't know, is he some sort of mastermind behind the scenes that is he some sort of champion of chaos undivided? Is he something like Krell was, where he's he used to be a chaos worshipper but now became something else? What is he like? He's a very messed up. He's a very, like, the interesting thing about him is like the origin, that he's not quite human anymore. He's not quite human. He never was. He was there before humanity was even a thing. He's like this primordial thing. Is he something from there? I feel like, in closing, I'm going to put him in there. You're going to need to rewrite him to a degree, and then that won't be Drachenfels. He'd just be something else. So, I'm hoping he doesn't make it into Warhammer Total War. But if he does, I'm hoping he's at least coming with somebody interesting. Like Danquil. Danquil's a good villain, actually. He's a Skaven, so he kind of has the cartoon villain stuff, but he's at least funny. So, thank you for watching. If depending on how well this video does, I'm hoping that maybe I can invest in video editing and stuff so I can actually make a video that looks presentable and not me just ranting in my pajamas. All right. Thank you for all for watching, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.